Well, I grew up in Silver Springs, Maryland, which is on the north point of Washington, D.C. So where I grew up was only a mile or two to the District of Columbia. And I went to high school at a Seventh-day Adventist high school, which was a parochial school. So when I graduated in the summer of 67, I ended up in another parochial college for a year. And I was just getting tired of the religious aspect of everything. So in the summer of 68, I dropped out of college and I lost my 2S deferment and went to work at a Dodge dealership in Washington, D.C. for until I got drafted, basically. So that that year I spent, playing around with cars and motorcycles and drag racing and just everything that a 19, 20-year-old kid would be doing at that time. After, in August of 1969, I got that letter in the mailbox, report for duty. And I was thinking, wow, this is like the last draft call. Couldn't they just waited a little longer? Because the lottery system came in right after that. If I'd have survived that last draft call, uh, the lottery number I got was 226. And looking back, they didn't call anybody after 195 in my neighborhood. So I would have probably missed the whole thing. But that's not the way it worked out. So now I'm being inducted at Fort Bragg. I end up, I got changed to 1AO, which is a conscientious objector status. And that was based on the church's position of non-combatancy and had it all worked out with a selective service board. So everybody at my school that got drafted basically was a conscientious objector unless they waived the O. And most everybody I knew that went in the Army was a medic. It's all you could be with a conscientious objector status on you. So, it wasn't real popular at Fort Bragg, and I got shipped off to Fort Sam Houston where they trained the medics. Well, they were really confused what to do with a bunch of like 200 conscientious objectors down there. I had a smoky-topped drill sergeant, Sergeant Pagan, and he was hellfire and brimstone, and everybody else was, non-vets just back. We saw no training with weapons of any kind. In fact, we had to sign a waiver that we would even take hand-to-hand combat instruction, which was pretty light. And like I said, they didn't know what to do with us there. The Seventh-day Adventists got off on Friday night and didn't have to come back till Sunday because they didn't want to infringe on anybody's religious rights. And then the Quakers, the Mormons, and everybody else that had the conscientious objector status worked into their background, they didn't have to be there on Sundays. So it was like almost a weekly job. You train from Monday to Friday and then you leave and come back. It was really kind of weird. We had a couple of guys that got out of the Army just because they wouldn't train at all. They got their complete objector status. This one guy, you couldn't intimidate him or do anything or yell at him. The drill sergeant even went hoarse yelling at this kid. And he finally just, they just packed him up and said he was not suitable for service and sent him home. So it was an unusual place, basic training, no weapons. You basically learned how to give each other shots and bandage each other and start IVs and, not like today's combat medic. I think they're almost like doctor's assistants or something, or EMTs. We were just basically bandage them up, put them on the helicopter, and hope they survive, which they usually did for the better part anyway. We found out that we'd be going, well, you suspect it, but one night at the mess hall, Sergeant Pagan came out and with his clipboard and told us anybody's name that fell between the letter A and the letter M was going to Vietnam. And then The other guys were all going to Germany except for the one guy with the Z. He was going to Hawaii. And they all started laughing and looking at us, pointing at us like, well, we'll see you guys later. And then Pagan came in and said, well, don't laugh too hard because you'll be rotating in there in 6 months to replace them. So that kind of shut everybody up. But it was a fairly ominous afternoon. When, it was around Thanksgiving, I think we finally got the word. And then they gave us like 45 days leave. And I ended up in Vietnam 46 years ago on March the 5th, 1970. Well, let's see. It's March 22nd. And the day I went into the bush would be March 29th. That's a week from today, 46 years ago. And at that time, I had decided I was going to carry an M16, even though I was a conscientious objector. Classroom debates are one thing, but reality is what it is. And I don't think anybody on the other side was going to ask me what my political affiliation was or how I felt about shooting at somebody. So anyway, I go to the bush, and we end up out around Song Bay, LZ Buttons as it was known in those days. And about 2 weeks in, I get my first medevac patient. Greg Egan, who was a gunner in 3rd Platoon, got into some nasty little bees of some sort. And I guess he didn't know, and nobody else knew he had allergy to bee stings. So he became my first patient, my first medevac. And that all went down pretty good. I was pretty happy. He was pretty happy. Everybody, he had to go to the hospital finally. The fact that it all went as planned and we got somebody out. So I had a non-hostile medevac for my first attempt, which was muchly appreciated. After that, we got a call to come into the LZ back to Buttons, and everybody was there. The whole division seemed like it was there. We were camped everywhere, and we didn't know why. And it turned out we were being ordered into Cambodia by President Nixon. So we got weapons that we didn't carry normally, like law rockets and recoilless rifles and extra ammo and a lot of new stuff. And before you know it, on May 5th, we made about a 35 helicopter combat CA about 15 miles into Cambodia. I think we left from Loc Ninh and we went straight in around the Fishhook area, north of Parrotspeak. So we're out there, in a new terrain. It's like flat and wide open with big grassy fields. We called it the golf course after a while because it was really humping, except it was really, really hot. So one night we're set up in this thicket. There's these clumps of trees all around, and then there'd be a big wide open plain, and we set up on this road and we put out our automatic ambush on both our trail in and the incoming road towards our position. And we set up, we did, our normal dinner and whatever, and about dark 30, we start seeing like all these flashlights coming down the road. I'm going like, wow, this is going to be really crazy. It's like, in Nam, we didn't really see anybody very often, and here we are in an open field and we're just watching them come down the road at us. And about, 10 minutes later, they tripped our automatic ambush, and it was just crazy all night. We were throwing grenades at people running around or moaning and groaning and dying out there. It was pretty crazy. And so the next morning, we go out there and there's like pieces of 9 bodies laying there all over the ground, because we had 2 claymores and I think a Willie Pete and a couple of frags all tied together, and it was a big boom when it went off. There was one survivor that we found, and we got him out sort of ungracefully under a Huey and a jungle penetrator. I think he bounced off a couple of trees as he left. But that was probably the first big kind of combat I saw, and it was so surreal to sit there and watch it. You wanted to put your fingers in your ears. A couple weeks later, or a week or so later, we found a great big cache motor pool. That's what we were supposed to be finding, like going in and finding all the supplies and, breaking up the supply chain for these guys. And so second platoon calls in and says, well, we found a whole bunch of trucks and a garage and ping pong and generators. So the whole company moves over there, and we find, trucks in various states of repairs, some American Jeeps, some Land Rovers, just all kinds of things. So as I got to looking around, I felt kind of home again. I was back in a dealership, so to speak. So what happens next, I guess we set up there for the night or two, and I started tinkering with some of the trucks. And next thing you know, I got this one running, got that one running, got another one running. I wasn't real familiar with diesel at that time, but I knew the principle, and found that a couple of the big trucks were only missing some like filters on them. So I plugged those lines up and got the platoon to basically a whole platoon of guys, or as many as we could get, to push the trucks, and we got them jump started. So all the supplies that we found there, we got stuck in the trucks: bicycles, rice, tools, generators, welders, and we make this big long convoy over to LZ Evans. And it was a pretty crazy day. I mean, we've become a mechanized unit instead of a bunch of grunts on the ground. So we took the trucks over to Evans, and what they didn't want, we blew them up, and what was salvageable went to Benoit under a big Chinook or something like that, and they were all gone. And I think we kept a couple of trucks for a day or so and did a little truck driving instead of walking. But that was a pretty crazy experience. So we spent the next, I don't know, 4 or 5 weeks in Cambodia, and finally got the message that we needed to be out of there by June 30th. That was the end of the incursion. So we started walking back towards Vietnam's border, and we got into a firefight on June 14th that these guys were pretty good guys. They were definitely not your run-of-the-mill VC. They were NVA. And first platoon was on point that day, and they started the firefight, and it got pretty crazy. We couldn't get any commo with anybody until the RTO got up, basically hid behind a tree and held his assistant held the radio up behind a tree so we could get some artillery in there. And it was just a really crazy day. And we had Mickey Wright got killed that day, and Tom Johnson, our point man, he got wounded. And it just wasn't a good day. So the next day we get Mickey's body out. We have a medevac for TJ, and we get Mickey out the next day. And while we're doing the log, our company commander, Mike Christie, he decided to leave one of the automatic ambushes on the trail to our log site. And at that time, we had taken the full log, and all of a sudden this explosion goes off. And it was our automatic ambush had just blown up. So we head back down there to see what's going on, and there's a couple of NVA soldiers there that are dead. One with a B-40 or RPG rocket launcher and several rounds, and the other guy just with his basic AK. So we figured they were going to follow us in and shoot us up during log day, but their party got spoiled that day. So now we're headed back, and we go back through the bunker complex, kind of where we had the firefight the day before, and we find a bunch of like 10 freshly dug graves that evidently we had some success the day before, and we felt a little better. But that was the first KIA while I was in the company. So now we're in mid-June and we're still doing search and destroy in Cambodia, headed back towards the border. And we get this call on the 29th that we need to pick up the pace a little bit. So we start moving a little faster across the golf course out there. Big wide open terrain. I mean, it was flat. You could walk as hard as you wanted or as fast as you could carry your rucksack that day. But anyway, we get reporters coming in from Reuters and the Chicago newspapers, the Baltimore newspaper, and a film crew even come in to cover us coming out of Cambodia. It seems we're the last company out. So we thought that would be cool, our 15 minutes of fame. But we can't get across the river. We can't find a place to cross. And we couldn't get helicopters because they were too busy getting everybody else out of the country. So eventually, one of the Loach pilots spots a tree that's down across the river. And it's a great big old tree, like a mahogany tree or something like that. And it had fallen from Cambodia into Vietnam. So that became our bridge back into Vietnam. So here we are, on TV somewhere, in some news report, I'm sure, and these people are interviewing Mike Christie, and the kid from Chicago had his paper over there talking to him. I think his name was Tootie. And then everybody's there. There's, Army photographers and everything, and we're shinnying across this bridge, hoping we don't fall in and drown in the river below. So anyway, we get out on June 29th, and we go set up outside of Fire Support Base Thor, which is about 500 yards inside of Vietnam. It was a fire base we had actually built at one point, and then we went back into Cambodia. But so we're setting up about 1,000 yards outside of the fire base in a tree line, and we're pretty lax. We're having a good time. We got out of Cambodia with really only one death, which wasn't too bad, considering some of the other stories I've heard. But we're sitting there. We all go to bed, waiting for the choppers to pick us up the next morning. And about 4 o'clock in the morning, the mortar tube on the fire base lights up and starts firing mortars. Well, 3 of their mortars didn't go as far as they thought they were going to, and ended up being short rounds and hit right in the middle of our CP. And it was 2 of them were tree bursts, and the 3rd was a dud. And the shrapnel just went everywhere. We had 2 guys killed, Mike Waters and Merle Dentino got killed. Denny, we called Denny Dentino, because Merle was kind of, whatever. But anyway, those 2 guys got killed almost immediately. We had no radio commo. There was 27 guys wounded. And I had one guy in my platoon, his right tricep was pretty much blown completely off. And when you see that kind of carnage, you go like, wow, and he's bleeding all over the place. So I put bandages on him. I think I put two bandages in the wound, and then pressure dressing on the top. And then I carried Ringer's lactate, which is a blood expander, in my rucksack. So I got a bottle of Ringer's out, and I set him up on an IV. Gave him a couple shots of morphine, and he didn't really know what happened after the morphine took effect. But it was crazy. We couldn't get any support from the fire base until it got light, because they thought we were under attack. So we couldn't get any choppers in because the LZ wasn't secure. So we spent a couple of hours just bandaging everybody up. Second platoon leader, Craig Troop, had most of his right foot blown off, which he managed to save over the years. The head medic, sucking chest wounds. One of the medics in second platoon, he took a nick in the knee. I took a couple of pieces of shrapnel in one in my shoulder and one in my right butt cheek. And and didn't even realize it. It was just so chaotic and so adrenaline full, and you know, it was just crazy. So we had a friendly fire incident, is what they termed it, but you'll never find any report of it anywhere. I've gone to asked the National Archives to give me the box that has that time period in it, which doesn't seem to exist somehow. Nobody knows where that box went. None of those after action reports or any of those things seem to exist for that time period of like May through July for the 1st Cavalry Division at the National Archives. So I'm kind of miffed about that whole thing. They just swept it under the rug. Let's preface this with my entire duty station was in Vietnam. I did basic AIT, leave, NAM, and then I got a 180-day out, early out when I got back. I actually extended my tour 53 days over there to get out when I got back. So everybody that I would say, I met in Charlie Company in 3rd Platoon, the radio operator, his name was Gene Tetzlaff, who's recently, I guess he died about 10 or 15 years ago. I was trying to find him so I could thank him. He took me under his wing when I got there in the bush and showed me the ropes and how to cook my meals and all that stuff. So he was really important. I think he probably took an interest in me too because I walked behind him in line. So he didn't want this F&G behind him to blow him up accidentally. So it was sort of like, mutual cooperation at that point. My platoon leader at that time was Rick Fredericks, and he was a ROTC, ROTC guy that had joined the Army, I guess. And he was pretty savvy. He'd been in the bush for a while, and I thought he kind of knew what he was doing, and we had a pretty good, tight platoon. And one other thing I found out later on, I didn't know at the time, was that Mike Christie, who was my captain at that time, the company commander, because we were working company size while we were in Cambodia, he was a Marine, also a Ranger and Special Forces, and I'm going like, wow, that was really cool. I drew somebody that knew what they were doing. He'd been a Marine and had done a tour as a Marine, and then came back and went to OCS and went on to command our company. So those 3 guys there basically, are the ones I've respected the most. Yeah, I actually got out of the field twice. The first time I got out of the field after about 6.5 months with Charlie Company, I ended up going back to the headquarters, and they sent me over to 15th Medical for a while. And my orders to fly medevac had come through at that time. I said, well, I don't think that's such a great idea after spending 6.5 months in the bush. So while I'm trying to get those orders belayed, I get a call back from Charlie Company that the medic that originally replaced me had developed an allergy, and his eyes had swollen shut while he was in the field. So I had to pack up and go back out to the bush for a couple of more weeks while they found another replacement. I'm going like, why didn't I get an allergy or think of that? That would have been a great idea. So anyway, the second time I got out of the bush, I have to come back and explain to the division surgeon's office why I don't want to fly medevac. I said, well, I've already been in the bush for 6.5, going on 7 months now. I don't want to get shot at anymore. So as things progressed, I ended up talking to Colonel Becker. He was the division surgeon himself. And we were talking for a little while, and come to find out we were both from the state of Maryland, so I had a foot in the door. He goes, well, can you type? I said, yeah, I took 2 years of typing, and I'm not real good, but I can get it done. He goes, how about I need a driver? I said, well, I'm your guy. I said, I'm a motorhead. I'm a gearhead from back in the world. And he goes, well, I'd really like to have my Jeep 24 hours a day. And I said, well, I'll go down to the motor pool and PM your Jeep for their sergeant down there, and we'll see if we can't work something out. So after all was said and done, I had the Jeep up on the grease rack down there, and I think out of the 47 or 48 grease fittings that were on the Jeep, I found 46 of them. And that impressed the hell out of the sergeant at the motor pool. In fact, I think he wanted me to come down there and go to work, but the colonel went out, and I ended up being the colonel's driver, which was just gravy train. So all I had to do was break starch, put on my spit shine boots, and look like a strack trooper. And next thing you know, my job was getting rid of Colonel Becker at 6:45 up at the command center. I dropped him off every day, and he disappeared. And unless we had some, errands to run, we did what we did at the division surgeon's office. We were like the sanitarian, the entomologist. We inspected the mess halls and all the officers' clubs, and we checked the water quality at all the potable water stations. So unless I was taking one of those officers around or inspectors around, I was off the hook for the rest of the day. So I would do a photo tour of Phuc Vinh, or drive down to the PX, or go do the laundry in the village of Phuc Vinh, or, So I had a really easy job, so I'd have to say that's my easiest favorite duty.
When you were there on that job, didn't you get a traffic citation that the good colonel had to help you on?
Well, that's true. Of course, I was following a direct order. The colonel said, take these 4 captains, they were all medical officers, over to 227th and put them on the helicopter. Well, I did get a ticket for having 4 officers in my Jeep. That's 5 people in a Jeep, and only 4 are allowed. So basically, the 2 MPs that followed me into 227th, where the helicopter was waiting for these officers, wrote me up and gave me this ticket. And so now I'm looking at Article 15. And I didn't think that was really all that funny. So back to 15th Med, I explained myself to Colonel Becker, and he goes, well, you're just following a direct order. So he went with me to the Judge Advocate General's office, and they got together, and the 15 got wiped off of my record, and I was absolved of all guilt at that point.
Tell me about the company reunions that the company now has every couple of years.
Well, I went to my first one in 2010, which would have been 40 years later. The reunions were started by the original Charlie company that went over on the ship and came off the beach up in Vung Tau or someplace, on a landing craft. They were former airborne guys. They wore airborne tab over their first cavalry. They trained as a unit for a couple of years and went over as a unit. So they were, all good friends and good buddies. And it was kind of funny, though, because us being air mobile and them being airborne, there was some tension there. Plus we were draftees, and we were from the class of, 69 or 70 or something like that. So I guess, we kind of had 2 reunions the first year in 2010. However, through TWS, we were able to find about 17 people from my time period. I hadn't seen any of these guys in 40 years, including Mike Christie. There was several guys that came from the Midwest. They'd never even seen the ocean before, and we were in Myrtle Beach. I thought that was kind of funny. It was a pretty good time, even though there was the airborne, air mobile tension was kind of an issue. But I think everybody got along okay and had a pretty good time. I think the one thing that tied us together was in 3rd Platoon, we had David Osborne, who was on his 3rd tour. He was with those guys originally in Charlie Company, and so they gave him Charlie Company when he came back in 1970 and joined 3rd Platoon. Unfortunately, David didn't make it. He got killed on August 23rd of 1970 by a sniper. Well, let's see. I think, I just think when you look at it at the point where, you know, you went over pretty much by yourself and came home by yourself, in my time period. Uh, I got on an airplane in Benoit and flew all the way to Fort Dix, New Jersey, and I was out of the Army 14 hours later. And I think that's just that's a real culture shock to go from being in Benoit and then being in Fort Dix in 23 and a half hours we flew. And I just think that's the culture shock of that, coming home by yourself as opposed to coming home as a unit, it really makes a big difference. And I think, that's probably where a lot of isolation comes from for everybody that, went over there and came back by themselves. It's kind of weird, but sobering, or, when you look back on it, you really can't explain it very well. Nobody here really understands it either. So it's, I went back to my job at the Chrysler dealership. Everybody just kind of acted like I'd been there the whole time. They didn't even know what I'd been doing.
Would you say that there are any lasting negatives about your time in Vietnam?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I wake up a lot almost every day and think about something, that occurred over there. I live here in Florida now, so in the middle of the night when that flash of lightning goes off, it's like a trip flare. You're awake now. And the difference between thunderstorms and lightning is if I know a thunderstorm is coming and I know the lightning's coming, that's one thing. But when you're asleep at night and that lightning goes off and that big flash before the boom goes off, it's just like a trip flare and a claymore. So the rest of that night's kind of shot in the shorts. And then, just actually lately, though, with the Afghan and Iraq experience, I think that we're starting to get a little more credo, as Vietnam vets. So that's the only good thing I can think of, that we're starting to feel like maybe we're not hated so much these days.